Hello, my name is Tony Beers, and this is Movie Grades.
And just like the movies, we play out our last scene.
Another problem that I have is with how Night Owl looked in his costume. He's supposed to be a retired superhero, much like Mr. Incredible from The Incredibles. He's supposed to be a little bit out of shape, and in his costume he looked perfectly fit, and I felt this was wrong for the character. Something else that bothered me was that they had a lesbian superhero. This character was barely in the comic book at all, and they put her in this montage and they made her a lesbian, and I feel that they did this just as a political message, because gay rights is a hot political message right now, and I felt that this was just thrown in, and I felt it was unnecessary. There's a lot more action in the movie than there is in the book as well. I like this. When I heard that there was gonna be a movie based on the book, I felt that it was strange, since the book really does not have that much action in it. And I'm glad that they put a little bit more action, because if you're gonna have an action movie, you're gonna have to have a little bit more action in the movie. Another complaint that I have is that of Dr. Manhattan's voice. His voice does not change throughout most of this movie. I thought that when he grew to be 30 stories tall, that his voice would grow as well, and it didn't. I also thought that his voice, being Dr. Manhattan, would be more robotic or godlike sounding, and it just wasn't. Some people complained about the ending of this movie. Some people also complained that there was no giant squid at the end of the movie. The movie's ending actually made more sense to me. It really didn't matter what was the cause of the nations getting together. It really didn't. Did we really need to have a giant squid in the movie? I mean, it could have been a giant spaghetti monster as far as I care. It could have been anything. The thing about having like a giant squid in the movie is this would take the audience out of the movie. This squid would have came literally out of nowhere. The audience would see it and say, what the hell? What's that? Ozymandias would have to explain this monster. And this movie is almost over already. It's got like 10-15 minutes left in the movie. And for him to explain all of how it was genetically created, it would take you out of the movie. That's how I feel. Dr. Manhattan ended up being the scapegoat in the movie, and this made sense to me. We already know who he is. You don't have to explain who he is like you would have to explain a giant squid. People are already afraid of him because they think that he gives people cancer. So it made a lot of sense to me that he would be the scapegoat in the movie. Either way, in the book's ending and in the movie's ending, he goes off to another galaxy anyway, so it really doesn't matter that he was the scapegoat. At the end of the comic book, a lot of people's dead bodies are shown that were killed by the giant squid. In this movie, all you see is a bunch of destroyed buildings, and I feel that it would have been a bigger impact had we seen more dead bodies. Other people complain that there's no Black Freighter comic book in the movie. I have no problem with this whatsoever. That the book itself could have done without this. I'm glad that it's out of the movie. It's a complicated story, and it would confuse the audience. Is he part of the movie, or is he part of this comic book that this kid's reading? It really doesn't matter. It was something that could have been easily thrown away. And for those of you who are purists and think that it deserves to be in the movie, they're going to come out with a Black Freighter DVD anyway, so there you go. I don't care about the Black Freighter not being in the movie. I think the movie's actually better off without it. I've heard some people complain that Night Owl should not have seen Rorschach die. I think this is a better version of the story, because at the end of the book, it didn't make any sense to me that Night Owl or Silk Spectre didn't wonder what happened to Rorschach. No one in the books ever said, well, where's Rorschach? What happened to Rorschach? In the movie, Night Owl gets to see him die, and I feel that this is better since we can see that someone actually cared about Rorschach. In the book, no one cares what happens to him. So I'm glad that someone cares about Rorschach. When you make a movie from any source material, comic book or other book or video game or anything, there's gonna be something different about it. It can't be exactly the same. Besides, why go to a movie when you know exactly what's going to happen? What's the point in that? That's one of the reasons I never saw The Passion of the Christ, because I knew exactly what was going to happen. Christ was going to get crucified. If you want a movie that's going to be exactly like Watchmen, then get the Watchmen motion comic. It's going to be the closest thing to the graphic novel. It is word for word straight from the comic book. I made sure I watched all of this motion comic before I did this review. One thing that I think the movie did capture very well was the panic and fear that people had of nuclear war during the 80s. This was a real threat. I was 9 years old, so I knew a little bit about the panic that was going on, even though I was kind of young and naive. This was a real threat to our world. For those of you who weren't alive in '85 and want to know what it was like back then, I'm going to recommend a movie for you to watch to see what kind of panic and fear people had back then. One really good movie, and one of my more favorite movies of all time, is War Games. This movie accurately depicts what kind of panic people were feeling and fearing for World War III. That they thought that the bombs could drop any second and the whole world might have been destroyed. So, what's my final thought on Watchmen? Is it better than The Dark Knight? No. Is it better than some other movies out there, like comic book movies such as Iron Man or Spider-Man? It may not be better, but it's equal. So, this movie has some good points and some bad. It's not perfect. No movie is perfect, but it is pretty good. So, my final grade for this movie is a good B+. I'm Tony Beers, and I'll see you next time.